A question to those in the audience: who wants two 7-footers in next year's lineup? Who wants it? Because to be quite honest with you, I don't know if I do. And I'm not going to sit here and melt down and be negative, because I think there's a really interesting side to playing two really tall guys in your rotation. Well, let's go ahead and get into the comments. So just a few days ago, John Calipari hopped on a radio show. If I'm not mistaken, it was KSR. He was talking about the ability to play different guys in his rotation. He was asked about Aaron Bradshaw, the 5-star center in this upcoming class, and Ugonna and Yinzo, who was a 5-star center in this previous class. He reclassified to the 2022 recruiting class. And he said, quote, "When you have shot blockers, the opposing team's shooting percentages go down. So let's hope that, we may be able to play two 7-footers at one time because they're both skilled. They can both shoot. They can shoot 15-footers. One of them can shoot threes. So you have two 7-footers that, if you choose, you can play them together." And then there was a tweet from Jack Pilgrim saying that Cal also noted that Onyenso has a chance to be special. So here is the situation next year. You had Onyenso this past year kind of sitting on the bench, essentially irrelevant to what Kentucky did this year. Just kind of developing. He was a kid that, again, like I mentioned, reclassified, should have been playing in high school for half of this season, and he was just developing. That was Onyenso's thing. Bradshaw commits, if I'm not mistaken, sometime last, I want to say either mid-October or late October. And there's excitement about this pairing, this duo, because Bradshaw is different than Onyenso. Onyenso is offensively raw. He's a very, very good defensive prospect. Meanwhile, Bradshaw, I think, is a little bit more versatile. I think he can actually take some shots and knock them down. Like Cal mentioned, he can shoot the three. He's capable of doing things like handling the ball. He can play solid defense, but he's more of an offensive threat. So I think that immediately presents some intrigue. Like, well, what if you have that complementary pair on the floor with each other? Here's the problem that I have with this. I think the game, and who knows, this is just my subjective opinion, the game, I think, has modernized and changed to the point where you can have success playing some of these tighter spacing, taller-looking lineups, right? You can have success, but you're never going to win a title doing it. If that's the goal, and it should be every year at Kentucky, I don't know if Kentucky can do that anymore. Some of you out there may say, well, Cal almost won a title doing it with Cat and Willie Cauley-Stein a while ago. That was almost a decade ago. That was quite a while ago. And even KSR notes, like, sure, these guys aren't Cat and Willie Cauley-Stein, but they're still very, very talented players. Let's not discount that at the same time. While I may sit here and say, I don't necessarily know if that's good for Kentucky's offensive system, let's also talk about the fact that while these guys are still incredibly special prospects, they aren't just some 5 stars. On top of all of this, if you guys want to talk about Kentucky playing an outdated system, I mean, these guys could fit into it. I mean, shoot. I think that these two guys could probably work fine. If Kentucky's going to run something so people claim to be outdated, and they run it with 2 taller guys, I mean, that's how the system works. You don't run an outdated system with shorter players, you'll figure out very quickly that you can't protect the rim like you did this year. There was something that Matt Jones tweeted. I know some of you like him. I know some of you don't. But this is more about what he pulled from the KSR Facebook group. And he said it's a great statistical look at this year's Kentucky basketball team. According to this poll from the KSR Facebook group, Kentucky took 38.6%, they made 38.36% of their mid-range jumpers, right? They made 67% of the shots they took directly at the rim, and they made 38% of the shots that they took in the paint, just not at the rim. They shot 34% from straight on from three, and they shot 36.9% from the corners, okay? According to points per field goal attempt, they averaged about 1.3 inside directly at the rim, 0.77 and 0.78 for the mid-range and inside the paint, and then 0.103 and 0.111 for three-pointers. So what that tells you, just looking directly at the statistics, is the mid-range jumper is a shot that statistically Kentucky hit almost less than they did from outside the arc, and it's worth a point less. And it's shown in the points per field goal attempt that they got when it compared to taking threes and taking shots at the rim. It's a very, very, very straightforward way of explaining three is better than two. You hit from three almost as often as you do from inside the arc at two compared to at the rim. So, therefore, if you're looking to run an efficient offense, you look for the corners, you look for straightaway threes, and you look for the rim. And you may say, Lance, it's so much more difficult than just saying that to actually implement an offense that's good at that a defense does not clamp down on. And you're right. It does take skill to modernize, and it takes a smart, offensively minded coach to make that adjustment and to make it work. That's what Alabama's doing. That's what Brandon Miller and Mark Sears and Noah Clowney and all of these lengthy guys there at Alabama are doing right now. They're spacing really, really well with tall guys that can shoot, first and foremost, and they're getting efficient shots. They're not taking bad shots. This little graph here, this little breakdown of Kentucky's shot percentages and the areas that they took them, goes on to explain what this team would look like with a modern offense, so to speak. So Kentucky took 60 shots a game. They averaged 74 points a game, and their points per field goal attempt was 1.013, okay? So 74 points a game. If they cut out the mid-range to the averages of a modern offense, which they go from taking 22% of their shots from mid-range to 5%, they go from taking 27.5% of their shots directly at the rim to 40%, which, by the way, I just want to say the fact that only a quarter of your shots are at the rim is disgusting. And you go from taking 21.5% of your threes to 30% of your shots being threes. You go from averaging 74 points to almost 81 points a game in the same amount of shot attempts. Your points per field goal attempts goes up. And I know that some of you may not care about all these numbers. Here's what I'm trying to tell you. If you take better shots, let's not even talk about numbers here for a second. If you take shots that are easier to hit and you hit them just as often as you do more difficult shots that count for less points, you should be taking the less difficult shots significantly more often. Because at the end of the day, if they give you an extra point and they're easier to hit, why wouldn't you search for them? Why wouldn't you try and hit them? And I'm not saying every single shot should be a three. I'm saying every shot that Kentucky has should be an efficient shot selection. Every shot should be an attempt at that, right? In a normal half-court setting. I'm not saying when the pressure's on. I'm not saying when you got to get a buzzer-beaten look. I'm saying whenever you're just running your offense, every shot should be a look at the rim or from an efficient spot outside of it. You don't have to cut down on the mid-range entirely, but you have to cut down on it significantly if you want to become as elite as you could be. Do you guys remember actually this time last year, after Kentucky lost to St. Peter's, we were doing kind of a year in review, and I was sitting here saying, look, Kentucky had a good offense. It was the defense that faltered down the stretch for them. I'm not trying to sit here and say, what if? This offense could have been better, and I don't know how many more wins it could have equated to. I'm just acknowledge it. Let's acknowledge the fact that if they had better shot selection, this would have been a better offense overall. I don't know, would it have changed anything? I don't know. I'm just saying that it could have been better by enough of a margin to say, okay, what does Kentucky got to do next year to change this? And do you remember we were doing shows in the summer, and one of the shows that we did was saying Kentucky's probably going to have a more modern offense just based on what Cal was saying. And that ended up being very much so not true. I've got no faith in him changing anything. I've got no faith in this coaching staff changing anything. They're going to try and go out there with some really, really talented big men and several guards and wings that can shoot the three. They're going to try and make them take mid-range jumpers about 4 times more often than they should. And I think it's going to be extremely painful to watch. Unless they just adhere to what these kids' strengths are, I think it's going to be very painful to watch. Not because Kentucky's not going to score, but because of the realization game in and game out of what this team could be. So if you want to play 2 7-footers, have at it. I just don't think it's going to bring you a title. If that's what Cal wants to do, I don't think it's bringing them a title. I fence ride too often on this show. And I think that this is one that I'm going to plant my flag on. If Aaron Bradshaw and Ugonna and Yinzo start beside each other next year, Kentucky basketball will not win a national title. And I don't think they'll make a Final Four either. If you disagree with that, if you agree with that, you can leave it in the YouTube comments below, or you can hit me on the socials. And that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. We've got some really, I think, more fun topics coming forward. Now that we've lost, I don't want to sit here and reflect on the season and whine and complain. I want to look forward to next year. Let's be critical where we should be critical, and let's get excited where we should get excited, because while we may sit here and complain about the offense, about what it could not be, listen, we got 5 5-stars coming in that we need to talk about. We've got so many different transfer portal things we need to talk about.